Hi, in this video we are going to talk about definition according to Suhrawardi. If you like this video, please like and share. Thank you so much for your monetary support. In classical philosophy, the concept of definition serves as a fundamental tool for acquiring knowledge about the external world. This idea, rooted primarily in the works of Plato, unfolds through what is often called the Socratic method.
Through a process of dialogical questioning, Plato aims to refine a given concept or thing by continuously questioning and redefining it until one arrives at an understanding of its true essence. For Plato, the purpose of defining is not just to describe a thing, but to reveal its immutable and ideal form, the essence that remains constant across all individual instances. For example, Plato would argue that to define justice, one must strip away all the contingent and varying instances of justice in the physical world and focus instead on the pure, abstract form of justice, a universal ideal that transcends the particular. Aristotle, however, approaches the concept of definition with a more empirical and structured framework, placing emphasis on a thing's essential characteristics as observed in the physical world. For him, definition seeks to capture the essence of a thing by specifying its whatness, or what it fundamentally is, which he sees as universally true across instances of that thing. Aristotle's perspective on definition, unlike Plato's focus on abstract forms, is grounded in the physical and observable attributes of an object. For example, in defining human, Aristotle would look for the unique features that make up human nature, such as rationality and sociality, thereby revealing the essence of humanity. He encapsulates this in his famous statement that definition is held to concern essential nature and is in every case universal, meaning that the definition of a thing must universally capture its true identity, not just its incidental attributes, but those which define its existence across all instances. Thus, while Plato's definitions aim to reveal an ideal form beyond the physical, Aristotle's definitions focus on the essence within the physical, observable world, seeking universality in the shared characteristics that define a class of entities. Both approaches, though differing in orientation, highlight definition as a path to uncovering deeper truths about reality. Both philosophers consider definition significant for human to know a thing. Aristotle even regarded definition as the door of knowing something, for it not only clarifies an obscured thing in a precise way, but also to some extent is efficacious for giving understanding of a thing to be known. Quote, "Something can only be said to be known if all its essences are known." Thus, for us, a definition is only achieved through something that is specifically related to the entirety of that thing. Suhrawardi's illuminationist philosophy combines empirical and intuitive elements, holding that the essence of something cannot be separated from it, whether in reality or mentally.
Therefore, a thing cannot merely have an essential definition divided into genus and differentia. Instead, it must be described as it appears. To define something, one must see it directly.
The aspect that a definition is only achieved through something specifically related to the entirety reflects Aristotelian influence, allowing an object to be defined narratively. Conversely, the emphasis on understanding the whole essence, as in the statement, "something is known if all its essences are known," conveys a Platonic nuance, requiring knowledge of the idea or mental concept of the object, not just its empirical form. Thus, many scholars conclude that Suhrawardi's theory of definition is essentially an elaboration of the definitional theories of Plato and Aristotle. Suhrawardy himself sets out 3 strict conditions for defining an object. He explains, to define something for someone unfamiliar with it, the definition must account for everything that makes the object distinct, whether in its individuality, its parts, or its totality.
According to this requirement, a definition is only valid if it precisely captures each essential attribute that together constitute the object, even if some of these attributes might also appear in other objects.
The difficulty, however, lies in whether a definition can truly list all the essential characteristics inherent to an object. If attempted, the outcome would likely be an overly detailed, exhausting description, which may not only be inefficient but could also add layers of unnecessary complexity. For instance, defining human as rational animal falls short because rational is only one of many attributes a human possesses. This definition omits many other important characteristics, such as working, believing, worshiping, practicing culture, and social interaction. It is inadequate to claim that these attributes are mere reflections of rationality and that defining humans as rational animals is sufficient. Suhrawardy's first condition requires that a definition include all collective, partial, and individual attributes of the object, rather than simply assigning a distinguishing feature that sets it apart from other entities. Quote, a definition must be constructed using something clearer, not with something equally clear, let alone with something unclear or only known through what is to be defined. It seems Suhrawardy implies that a definition must generate new knowledge, not be tautological or merely a nominal substitution. Thus, defining father as a person who has a child cannot be considered valid, as it does not provide new knowledge. According to Suhrawardy, such a definition is invalid because the definiendum holds an equivalent position to its definiens. In other words, knowing one automatically leads to knowledge of the other. The third condition is, something used to define must already be known before the object being defined. Thus, the two cannot be simultaneous. In this context, Suhrawardy aims to avoid definitions that consist of identical phrases where the defined object appears as identical to the words that define it. He argues that the definition of an essence should not simply be a word substitution, as such definitions can only be understood by someone who already knows the object, but not by someone who does not. For example, defining fire as a chemical element similar to life, or defining the sun as a star that rises during the day, is inadequate. These definitions are invalid because fire and a chemical element are not only identical but are also understood simultaneously. Similarly, defining the sun as a star that rises during the day is problematic. The factual reality shows that day is closely tied to sun, and sun is closely tied to day. Thus, these two elements in the definition arise simultaneously in understanding. Muhammad Iqbal adds explanation. We define horse as a neighing animal. Now we understand animality, because we know many animals in which this attribute exists, but it is impossible to understand the attribute neighing, since it is found nowhere except in the thing defined. The ordinary definition of horse, therefore, would be meaningless to a man who has never seen a horse.
Suhrawardy's skepticism towards the capacity of definitions to provide accurate novel knowledge becomes more even apparent as he outlines 3 inherent obstacles encountered when attempting to define something.
These challenges may arise from the subject attempting the definition, the object being defined, or the complexity of definition itself. The first obstacle is human limitation in perceiving things. Naturally, it is undeniable that humans, as limited beings, cannot perceive something completely, fully, purely, and as it truly is. Any instrument humans use to seek knowledge inevitably encounters the barrier of limitation, making it difficult to achieve essential and comprehensive understanding. In other words, Suhrawardi emphasizes that any object humans attempt to grasp is highly intricate and complex, making it nearly impossible to be fully known. Quote, "A person who claims to know the essence of something may still have essences yet unknown to them. Therefore, the one defining should not say, 'If there were another attribute of the object being defined, I would certainly know it.' Many attributes of the object being defined are not apparent. If even one essence escapes observation, then knowledge of reality becomes uncertain." The second challenge involves the inherent complexity of the definition process. Suhrawardi emphasizes that defining something requires more than just identifying its natural essence. Alongside the defining traits of an object, there are also other attributes that must be taken into account during the definition process. Thus, a definition must encompass not only the most specific essence, but also other relevant characteristics. For instance, while defining humans as rational animals captures the essence of humanity in terms of thinking, it overlooks other essential qualities that define humanity, even if they are not the most prominent. This limitation arises from our inability to fully express the variety of inherent traits associated with being human.
Given the necessity to acknowledge these additional attributes along with the defining characteristics, we can conclude that definitions provide an imperfect understanding of knowledge, since we can never fully comprehend all the inherent qualities that exist within any entity.
The third challenge arises from the object that is to be defined. Among the many realities in life, there are some things that possess only a genus but do not have a differentia, making them indefinable. Examples include color, sound, or smell. Suhrawardi illustrates this with the color black, which can only be defined by itself. Quote, "Black is a simple, rationalized object that is not divided into unknown particles. A person who has not witnessed it cannot define it, and a person who has witnessed it does not need a definition. Besides color, sound, and smell, numerous other realities only have a genus but lack a differentia, making direct interaction essential for understanding them. For example, sweetness is a simple object known only to those who have tasted it. Thus, regardless of how comprehensive a definition of sweetness may be, it cannot impart any knowledge to someone who has never experienced it firsthand."
Suhrawardi does not provide operational steps, the process of formation, or even concrete examples of the definition he proposes. His decision not to elaborate his theory of definition can be understood considering that from the beginning he hasn't held a priori stance towards definitions, especially Aristotelian definitions, in the pursuit of knowledge. Alternatively, he may have intentionally left his theory of definition unresolved because creating such definitions is indeed impossible to achieve.
Suhrawardi underscores that the knowledge of an object is shaped by the relationship between the subject and the object, unimpeded by any obstacles. He refers to this direct interaction as a relationship of illumination, idafa ishrakiya. He argues that when something is directly perceived, there is no need for a definition. The mental representation of an object matches its form as experienced through the senses. For him, knowledge acquired through this kind of perception is termed mushahada, vision or witnessing, and is regarded as far more profound than predicative knowledge.
It is important to realize that despite Suhrawardi's criticism of the peripatetics on the subject of definition, he does not discard definition as an entirely invalid means of attaining knowledge. What he is trying is to allude to the limits and inadequacy of definition in arriving at certainty, having claimed that definition in their usual forms are an inadequate or invalid approach to gaining knowledge. The questions arise: what alternative method does Surawati suggest for knowing something that could replace the role of the definitional method? In other words, what does he consider the proper way to attain knowledge about an object? Thank you so much for watching, and my special thanks goes to Timarus for the support. See you.